Hey, where are you? I've been waiting forever. We promised to submit the marriage papers today, didn't we? 30 minutes had passed since the scheduled time, and Kyle still hadn't shown up at the city office. Frustrated, I finally called him.
Seriously? You've been waiting all this time? Marriage? That was a joke. There's no way I'm marrying you.
Wait, what? You're kidding, right? Today, on what was supposed to be the luckiest day on the calendar, we had planned to officially get married. I had marked the date with a red pen on the calendar and eagerly counted down the days. But all of my genuine hopes and dreams were shattered by none other than Kyle himself. Suddenly, the call switched to video. When I looked at the screen, I saw Kyle grinning maliciously. Behind him, I could see his coworkers from the same department laughing hysterically. And to my shock, among them was Avery, someone I had thought was my best friend.
A country bumpkin like you should be thankful that you even got to dream about marriage.
I'm going to marry Avery. You're useless to me now. Let's break up.
It hit me then that everything had been planned from the start. Fine, I'll break up with you. Shaking with anger and betrayal, I managed to force those words out. But deep inside, I vowed to take revenge on everyone who mocked me. My name is Sarah. I've always been shy and avoided interacting with people, spending most of my childhood alone. Plain, quiet, invisible. Those were the labels people always attached to me. Even after becoming an adult, my daily life was nothing but a dull routine of commuting between work and home. I had barely ever talked to men, let alone dreamed of finding a boyfriend or getting married. But one day, things took an unexpected turn. One of my few friends from school, Avery, introduced me to a guy. His name was Kyle, and he was a co-worker of Avery's.
He said he fell in love with you at first sight after seeing you in town.
He fell for me at first sight. I couldn't believe it. Compared to Avery, I was far plainer and didn't know much about fashion. There had to be some mistake. But since Avery insisted I at least talk to him, I reluctantly agreed to meet Kyle. Despite my initial hesitation, Kyle made a good first impression. Maybe it was because Avery had told me he was also inexperienced in relationships and nervous about confessing his feelings. With Avery acting as a go-between, Kyle and I started dating with marriage in mind.
I need to renew my lease soon. If it's okay with you, why don't we move in together?
Not long after we started dating, Kyle and I began living together. Looking back, it was impulsive to start living together so soon. But I was too excited about my first boyfriend to think it through. However, once we started living together, Kyle's odd behavior began to surface.
Hey, why didn't you do what I asked you to do?
Kyle's angry voice echoed through the house early in the morning. Apparently, he was upset because I hadn't ironed his shirt properly. Sorry, I was so busy with work yesterday. I meant to do it, but I forgot. Can you wear a different shirt today? My work had been hectic and it ended up working overtime yesterday. Although I rushed home to prepare dinner, I had forgotten to iron his shirt. There were plenty of other shirts in the closet. When I suggested he wear one of those, Kyle's expression turned sour.
What? I plan to wear that shirt today. Just iron it now. Or are you seriously telling me to wear a wrinkled shirt?
Well, I don't have time. I still need to get ready, and if I iron it now, I'll be late for work.
Not my problem. Household chores are your responsibility, so just do them right. Oh, and am hungry. Make me breakfast first. God, you're so useless.
Kyle's demands were selfish and completely lacked consideration for me. He was always like this, bossing me around and giving orders as he pleased. His attitude was less like that of a boyfriend and more like someone giving orders to a servant or a housekeeper. But since he was my first boyfriend, I put up with it, desperate not to be disliked. One day, Kyle said he wanted to eat my cooking for the first time in a while. Recently, he had been coming home late, claiming he was busy with work, so we hadn't had dinner together in ages. Hearing his request made me happy. I'll put my heart into it and make something special.
Good. I'll come home early tonight.
Thrilled by our rare, romantic interaction, I started thinking about what to cook. After finishing work quickly, I stopped by the grocery store on my way home and bought plenty of ingredients. I'll make all of Kyle's favorite dishes. He'll definitely be happy. Looking back, we had been out of sync ever since we started living together. I hoped that today could be the turning point to get back to how we used to be. As I cooked, I wished for that with all my heart. What's going on? He's so late. Is his work running long? I finished cooking and waited for Kyle to come home. He had promised to come home early today, yet even past 9 p.m., he still hadn't returned. The carefully prepared dinner I set on the table had already gone cold. Worried he might have been in an accident, I called his phone several times, but he didn't pick up. Should I call the police? As I sat alone in the room debating, Kyle finally contacted me. Hello, Kyle. Where are you right now? The answer I got was unbelievable.
I'm out drinking with coworkers.
Drinking? But you said you'd come home early because you wanted to eat my cooking.
I got invited last minute. What was I supposed to do?
Kyle sounded unapologetic, completely indifferent to how I felt. His tone made it clear he didn't think he had done anything wrong.
I can eat your cooking anytime. Of course, it'd prioritize going out for drinks. Guys have their own social obligations, you know. You wouldn't get it. Anyway, I'm hanging up.
Kyle hung up abruptly, leaving me stunned. After that, he started going out drinking without letting me know more and more often. He also frequently asked me for extra cash, saying, I've got important social obligations. We had agreed to split the living expenses 50-50 when we moved in together, but Kyle started dodging his share.
I need money for my social life. You could at least cover the household expenses. Not like you'd understand who don't have any friends. Let's be real. No one but me would ever put up with someone like you.
By this point, Kyle didn't even bother hiding his condescending attitude toward me. Was I really going to marry this man? But as Kyle said, someone as lonely and plain as me might never find another person willing to date me. With that thought, I couldn't muster the strength to stand up for myself, no matter how unfairly he treated me. One day, something happened that deepened my doubts about Kyle even further. Ugh, why does he always leave his clothes lying around? How can anyone be so messy? While Kyle was taking a bath after work, I picked up the clothes he had carelessly thrown on the floor of the bathroom. Kyle had a habit of leaving his clothes all over the place. If I didn't clean up after him, the house would become a total mess. As I gathered the clothes to put them in the laundry, I noticed something off. "What's this smell?" It wasn't detergent or body odor. It was an unpleasant scent that made my nose wrinkle. It was women's perfume. The strong scent was coming from the clothes Kyle had just taken off. As I inspected the shirt more closely, I spotted lipstick smudged on the collar. Could this be cheating? The undeniable evidence of another woman drained the color from my face. Determined, I confronted Kyle as he came out of the bathroom.
Huh. Someone must be bumped into me on the train, and that's how the lipstick got there. What are you accusing me of?
Kyle laughed it off, denying he had cheated. But the perfume smell.
Everyone wears perfume. The smell must be rubbed off from somewhere. What? Are you doubting me? Do you even have any proof?
No, never mind. I'm sorry for accusing you. When I apologized, Kyle sulked and accused me of being the worst for doubting him. Then he stomped out of the house in anger. Since I didn't have concrete evidence, I couldn't push the issue further, which was frustrating. But my instincts told me something was definitely off about Kyle. I think Kyle might be cheating on me. Unable to keep it to myself, I reached out to my friend Avery to talk about Kyle. I told her everything, his unreasonable behavior, and the suspicious signs of another woman.
You're just being too sensitive. Try to be more easygoing.
Avery brushed off my concerns, saying it was wrong to doubt men so easily. But I don't know if I should keep dating Kyle.
Wow, you're being so weak. If you put in more effort, Kyle will change. To be loved, you have to work harder, Sarah.
Avery told me to endure everything quietly, no matter what happened.
Honestly, Sarah, you're so naive. Women should just stay quiet and obey their men.
Yeah, you're right. I'll do my best, just like you said. Reluctantly, I nodded in agreement with Avery's advice. Following Avery's advice, I stopped arguing with Kyle and started obeying him, no matter what he said. On the surface, peaceful days seemed to continue after that. But that peace came at the expense of me constantly walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting Kyle. No matter how exhausted I was from work, as soon as I got home, I had to tiptoe around his moods and comply with his unreasonable demands without complaint. It's like I'm a slave. What had started as a hopeful cohabitation with my first boyfriend had now turned into a living hell for me. But perhaps because of my constant endurance, Kyle one day brought up the idea of getting married.
Let's get married soon. When would be a good day to file the paperwork?
I couldn't believe those words were coming from Kyle, and I was over the moon with joy. All my patience wasn't for nothing. Avery was right. Keeping quiet and enduring really was the answer. Kyle and I decided to submit the paperwork 10 days later, on what was supposed to be a lucky day. I marked the date on the calendar with a red pen and eagerly counted down the days. But my innocent dreams of marriage were shattered by none other than Kyle himself. 10 days later, we agreed to meet in front of the city office to submit the paperwork. Suppressing my excitement, I waited for Kyle. I still couldn't believe someone like me, who had no connection to romance, was about to get married. Of course, I had my worries about life with Kyle. But I convinced myself that, as Avery had said, Kyle would change after marriage. That's how I stayed positive. Even when the appointed time came, Kyle didn't show up. For a moment, I wondered if he'd gotten the date wrong, but I had checked the calendar countless times. There was no way I was mistaken. After waiting for 30 minutes past the meeting time, I finally called Kyle. "Hey, where are you? I've been waiting in front of the office this whole time."
Seriously? You've been waiting all this time? The marriage thing was a lie. Am not marrying you.
"Wait, what? You're joking, right?" As I asked, the call suddenly switched to video. On the screen, I saw Kyle grinning maliciously. Behind him, his coworkers from the same department were laughing hysterically. And to my shock, among them was Avery, the friend I thought I could trust. "What's going on? Where are you guys?"
We're in Hawaii. Took some PTO for a little department vacation.
"Do you even know what today is? And Hawaii? You didn't say a word about this to me."
Bug, you're so annoying. You're useless to me now. Let's break up.
"Wait, please explain."
This should make it clear, even for someone as clueless as you. Look,
With that, Kyle showed me Avery's left hand, where a ring sparkled on her ring finger.
Thanks to you, I managed to save a ton of money while we were living together. I used it to buy Avery a great ring.
let's not have sex before marriage. I want to cherish you. Ha! You fell for that hook, line, and sinker. You were just a maid and a cash cow to me.
According to Kyle and Avery, our relationship was just a ruse to save up money for their wedding. From the very beginning of our relationship, Kyle had said, "Let's not have any physical intimacy before marriage." And we maintained a pure relationship. I had wholeheartedly believed it was because of his kindness. However, Kyle had never intended to date me seriously or marry me from the very beginning. He used me as a convenient housekeeper, made me pay for living expenses, and secretly saved up money for Avery's ring.
You should be happy you even got to dream about marriage, considering how plain you are.
It was exhausting having to put up with you every day, even for the money.
Behind them, their coworkers laughed hysterically.
How could you not notice?
You're way too naive.
I didn't need them to tell me. I was already overwhelmed with shame and anger. Shame for having been deceived by a friend and anger at myself for loving such a terrible man. After all this, my feelings for Kyle vanished in an instant. "Fine, I'll break up with you." With a trembling voice, I squeezed out those words.
Glad you're being reasonable. See ya. Next time, find someone in your league. Though I doubt anyone would want a boring woman like you.
Kyle threw those final, cutting words at me before hanging up. 2 days later, after returning from their vacation, Kyle and his group were unexpectedly summoned to the CEO's office. Everyone who went to Hawaii was called in, and they were visibly anxious about what the CEO might say. Among them, Kyle and Avery were acting particularly suspicious for one reason. they noticed me standing next to the CEO. Noticing me standing next to the CEO made Kyle freeze.
Why are you here?
It wasn't me who answered his question. It was the CEO.
Sarah is my daughter.
With that one sentence, everyone's faces went pale.
Your daughter? But you have a different last name.
Kyle wasn't wrong. My father and I do have different last names. That's because my parents divorced when I was a child. Even after the divorce, my father and I met regularly and maintained a close relationship, even sharing meals as adults. Of course, I had told him about Kyle, but I intentionally didn't reveal that my father was the CEO. I figured it would make Kyle overly self-conscious. Dad, take a look at this. I had recorded the humiliating video call from the other day and showed the footage to my father. The video clearly captured the faces of everyone in the department enjoying their vacation in Hawaii. As he watched them mocking me with cruel expressions, my father looked saddened but said firmly,
You're all fired. Don't bother coming in tomorrow.
What? That's impossible.
Although my father's company had been growing its revenue recently, there were also plans to downsize. According to HR, the department Kyle belonged to had a terrible reputation both inside and outside the company due to their behavior. While that alone wasn't enough grounds for dismissal, their mistreatment of me provided the perfect excuse to shut the entire department down.
It's convenient that all of you were in the same department. You'll pay for disrespecting my daughter.
My father announced that everyone present would face either termination or an equivalent penalty. To think that the plain woman they had mocked turned out to be the CEO's daughter. Even though they hadn't known, the gravity of what they had done left everyone trembling with fear.
I had nothing to do with this.
Avery was the first to deny her involvement. She was likely betraying Kyle in an attempt to save herself and remain with the company.
You're the one who suggested it in the first place.
Kyle snapped back, hurling the ring he had given her onto the floor.
If you guys hadn't egged me on, I wouldn't have done something so stupid. Take responsibility for this.
Kyle then began blaming the other coworkers, refusing to acknowledge his own guilt. The room devolved into chaos as everyone started shouting that they weren't at fault, eventually breaking into a brawl. It was hard to believe that these same people had been so cheerful during their Hawaiian getaway. They had only bonded over looking down on someone weaker than them, and their unity crumbled the moment things went wrong. Watching their ugly fight unfold, completely forgetting they were in the CEO's office, my father sighed deeply.
You all seem to enjoy physical activity. Fine. I'll spare you from being outright fired. I just remembered a workplace that's perfect for you.
Relieved, they stopped fighting, thinking they had avoided the worst. But the perfect workplace turned out to be far from ideal. Everyone in the department that had mocked me was sent to a grueling mining site in South Africa under the guise of training. There, they were subjected to backbreaking labor, extracting minerals for the company.
If you don't like it, you're free to quit anytime.
My father had told them before they left. However, quitting wasn't an option once they arrived. A month later, Kyle called me from South Africa, begging for help. I regretted not blocking his number, but reluctantly answered the call. He explained that for security reasons, their phones were confiscated on site, and he had to sneak out of the dormitory to find a payphone. Even finding that payphone had taken him 5 nights of walking continuously.
Why do I have to go through this?
Hearing Kyle's repeated complaints, I felt no pity for him. If anything, considering how he had treated me, I thought it wasn't nearly enough punishment. Kyle did have access to adequate food and rest. But whenever he complained about the harsh conditions, the local staff scolded him in their language, asking what he had to complain about.
I can't communicate with anyone. The food doesn't suit me, and the beds in the dorms are moldy. I can't stand this anymore. Please, talk to the CEO and get me out of here.
Apparently, morale at the mining site was at an all-time low. Avery, in particular, was spared from physical labor but was put in charge of cooking for the workers. Preparing 3 meals a day for over 100 people had her in tears, constantly begging to go home. Have you learned your lesson?
Yes, of course. I'm truly sorry. If I can come home, I'll do whatever you say.
All right, I'll talk to my father about bringing you back.
Really? Sarah, you're a lifesaver.
Kyle sobbed and thanked me profusely, his tone completely different from the arrogant and dismissive man he had once been. The harsh labor had clearly broken him. After some time, they were finally allowed to return to the US. When Kyle and the others came back, they were so physically and emotionally drained that they didn't even have the energy to protest to the CEO. As for Avery, her once beautifully maintained long hair was now disheveled and filthy with dust and dirt. Her skin had deteriorated, and she looked as though she had aged 10 years.
Good job on the training.
When they returned, my father greeted them with kind words and even provided showers and a lavish meal to welcome them back. Feeling pampered by the generous treatment, they seemed to forget why they had ended up in South Africa in the first place, laughing and celebrating.
You seem refreshed. Now, Kyle, I have a gift for you.
Huh? I get something?
Feeling emboldened by the luxurious treatment, Kyle leaned forward eagerly, hanging on to my father's words. My father took out his phone and began making a call. Kyle, his eyes brimming with expectation, watched closely. Was it money? Or perhaps something else? Having endured such grueling training, Kyle clearly believed he deserved a reward. About 20 minutes later, while they were enjoying drinks and high spirits, a group of people arrived. When they saw who had come, everyone froze. It was the police. The officers approached Kyle and abruptly restrained him.
What's going on? What did I do?
Kyle struggled in confusion, but with 2 officers holding him firmly, he couldn't break free. As Kyle, still bewildered, tried to process what was happening, my father stepped forward and spoke coldly.
I forgot to mention, I reported you to the police for marriage fraud.
What? Why? I thought you forgave me.
Normally, proving marriage fraud is difficult, but Kyle had left behind plenty of evidence, including video recordings of his plans to deceive me from the start.
I didn't do anything. This is a wrongful arrest. Get me a lawyer.
Kyle desperately denied the accusations. But then an unexpected betrayal occurred.
It's true. He intended to deceive Sarah from the beginning. We were just dragged into it. Right.
His coworkers all claimed they were uninvolved and pinned the blame entirely on Kyle.
Yeah, that's right. He's the real culprit.
Even Avery, in an attempt to save herself, turned on Kyle and pointed him out to the police.
Remember this, all of you. I will never forgive you.
Betrayed by Avery and his coworkers, Kyle turned red with anger and shouted at them. But no matter how loudly he protested, it couldn't absolve him of his guilt. Kyle was dragged away by the police, spewing parting threats. Eventually, Kyle was convicted of marriage fraud. Although it was his first offense and his sentence was relatively short, he still served time in prison. As for Avery and the other coworkers, they were all demoted to a notorious isolation department within the company, known as the banishment room, and eventually resigned. After leaving the company, Avery tried to find a new job, but bad rumors about her spread quickly, and no reputable company would hire her. Desperate to make a living, she took up night work. But her beauty, once her asset, had faded significantly due to her harsh time in South Africa. As a result, she struggled to gain popularity, and the younger workers at her establishment mocked her as an unpopular, annoying old woman. Avery reportedly blames me for her downfall and often complains to others about her misfortune, but no one pays her any attention. It was all her own doing, as she had plotted with Kyle to take advantage of me. Avery will likely continue her life at rock bottom, harboring resentment toward me without ever reflecting on her actions. As for me, I left the company where I had been working and now work as my father's secretary. I buried myself in work to forget the painful events of the past.
Have you met anyone new?
My father would occasionally ask me this, but I was completely done with men. Or so I thought, until my father introduced me to someone. He was a promising figure at the company's Paris branch, well regarded as a rising star within the organization.
His character is impeccable. I personally vouch for him.
Reluctantly, I started spending time with him, going out for meals and occasionally spending weekends together. As my father had said, he was incredibly sincere and had an earnest personality that began to win me over. However, I found myself haunted by a certain trauma.
No one would ever want a plain woman like you.
The words Kyle had once said to me kept flashing through my mind. Noticing my hesitation about the relationship, he gently asked if I would share the reason with him. Summoning my courage, I opened up to him about how I had been deceived by a man in the past. He listened and told me that, given my experience, it was perfectly natural to be cautious around men. He then reassured me that he would wait as long as it took for my heart to heal. Why was he so kind to someone like me? What could he possibly see in me? Because of how much Kyle had crushed my self-esteem, I even began to doubt his kindness. But true to his word, he waited patiently while I worked through my trauma. Our calm and understanding relationship continued, and eventually I became confident that I could trust him. I started thinking about marriage and decided to propose to him myself. He happily accepted, and we decided to get married. A year after our wedding, we were blessed with twins, and now we live happily together. My father is completely smitten with his first grandchildren and often visits our home to spend time with them. The stern man who always wore a serious expression at work now softens his face completely when he's around the babies. Seeing that is heartwarming beyond words. Even after giving birth, I've continued to work, sharing household and parenting responsibilities with my husband. I am endlessly grateful to him for saying, "We're both working, so let's support each other and live as a team." Kyle, the man I once lived with, never once said anything like that to me. Though the pain of being betrayed by Kyle and Avery hasn't fully healed, I can't dwell on it forever. I've resolved to move forward, embracing my new family and living a bright, joyful life.